Hello, everyone. This is a continuation of a series that I started about a week ago. I said that I would be speaking on Zionism, and I ended up speaking on anti-Semitism. And I think, anti-Semitism was an apt introduction to Zionism. So I'll begin today's installment, and I'm going to try to make it a short one because this is also going to be a multi-installment kind of an arrangement, with the question, what is Zionism? There's a lot of misunderstanding, just like I mentioned last time. There's a lot of misunderstanding of the term anti-Semitism. People, Arabs especially, arguing that they cannot possibly themselves be anti-Semites because they are Semites. Anyway, I hope that I've settled that question. Likewise, there is much talk about among Arab nationalist ideologues that their Jew hatred is actually anti-Zionism, not Judeophobia. And what I'd like to suggest with these installments is that anti-Zionism is in fact a form of Judeophobia and can be equated with anti-Semitism. If one says, I'm an anti-Zionist, I don't have hatred towards the Jews, but I hate Zionism. Well, that's a form of anti-Semitism. So to begin sort of shedding some light on this question, I think it would be useful to answer the question, what is Zionism? In very simple terms, Zionism is a Jewish national movement. In modern times, it was responsible for the establishment of the modern state of Israel as a Jewish national home. Although generally attributed to Theodor Herzl, a 19th century Austrian journalist, Zionism, that is the Jewish people's longing for Zion, Zion is one of the nicknames of Jerusalem. This longing for Zion is much older, is as old as Jewish history, if you will. So political Zionism is a modern phenomenon. It would reach its apogee perhaps with Theodor Herzl towards the end of the 19th century, early 20th century. But emotive Zionism, which is part and parcel of Jewish identity, dates back to, is coterminous with Jewish history, and dates back to the beginning of the Jewish diaspora, to the Galut or dispersion, the Babylonian exile of the 6th century BC, to be exact. The Lamentations of Jeremiah, Psalm 137, speak of the exiled Jews' longing for Zion. If I forget you, Israel, may my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. You know what I'm talking about. May my hand forget its skill, and so on and so forth. Those are the from the Psalms. Lamentations by the rivers of Babylon. We sat and we wept and we remembered Zion. So it's part of Zionism is the Bible, if you will. It's the history of the Jews and their Passover tradition. Jews the world over for almost 3,000 years remembered and longed for Zion, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, Jerusalem. The Passover Seder, usually, which was the Last Supper, the Jesus' Last Supper, is usually concluded with the prayer, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim. Here's a drink to spending this next year in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem, Zion, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel for 3,000, 4,000 years of Jewish history has been the focal point of Jewish existence, Jewish dreams, Jewish hopes, Jewish aspirations. And again, not so much Jerusalem only or exclusively in the geographical sense, but in a conceptual and spiritual sense as well. The Talmud says that creation began in Jerusalem and radiated outward to the rest of the world from Jerusalem. Medieval Christian maps show Jerusalem as the epicenter of Asia, Africa, and Europe. So, in essence, Zionism as a concept, as a Jewish concept, as part and parcel of Jewish history and Jewish identity, is 3,000 years old, even if as a political movement it dates back to the end of the 19th century. So Zionism and the longing for Jerusalem is foundational to Jewish national history and Jewish memory. It's an ancient belief in the eventual return of the Jews to the biblical land of Zion. It is a religious messianic idea that has existed for centuries and that was based on biblical stories and biblical promises and biblical prophecies. Jewish history during the Galut, during the diaspora, during the exile, the exilic history of the Jews outside of Zion, was marked by the appearance of a succession of self-proclaimed messiahs who promised to restore the Jews to Zion. But until 1791, that is right after the French Revolution, which also entailed the emancipation of European Jewry, so this Zionism, this emotive Zionism, before the French Revolution and specifically before 1791, lacked the political strength to do something about fulfilling that dream. Zionism itself and the Jews that propagated Zionism, the emotive Zionism, lacked the social and political mobility that would have been essential to the success of this yearning movement, the Zionism as a national political movement that will have been indispensable to the redemption of Zion and the restitution of the Jews to Zion. So without 1791, without the emancipation that was born out of the French Revolution, Jews and the Jewish diaspora could not have translated 3,000 years, 2,500, 3,000 years of a conceptual, spiritual, emotive Zionism into the coherent political movement that it became during the late 19th and early 20th century. The famous 1789 declaration of French deputy Clermont-Tonnerre at the French National Assembly this is a quote, to the Jews, and again this is an outgrowth of the French Revolution, 1789, to the Jews everything as individuals, to the Jews nothing as a nation. And by that, Clermont-Tonnerre marked the beginning of Jewish emancipation in Europe. Prior to Tonnerre, in his declaration, the Jews had to endure almost 18, 19 centuries of dispersion, exile, discrimination, and institutionalized and religiously, theologically sanctioned Jew hatred, which would later transform into anti-Semitism. And so this Jew hatred is certainly connected to the history of the Jews and connected to the history of Christianity. And the story of the Jews in the world today is part and parcel of the history of Christianity and the evolution of Christianity. At the same time, the story of the birth of Christianity itself belongs to Jewish history. although eventually un-Jewed and adapted to a pagan world and spread throughout the Mediterranean, Christianity was nonetheless a form of Judaism initially, and a transformation of Judaism eventually. It was the religious and political agitation among the Jews of Roman Judea, which later would become Roman Palestina after the Romans expelled the Jews. So the agitation of those Jews, among them Jesus or the sect of Jesus, agitation against Rome and against Roman domination, this agitation, or one segment of it, gave birth to the religion that we today call Christianity. So essentially, a religion is a sect that becomes successful, becomes a universal sect, and therefore a religion. Jesus belonged to a sect of Judaism, most probably the sect of the Essenes. They were agitating against Roman domination. That sect gained following. So in a sense, a Jewish boy, Jesus did well for himself and eventually had a religion named after him. Christ, Christianity, Christ, Christos, the Messiah, Mashiach in Hebrew and in Canaanite, in Phoenician. It would be good to remember that Jesus himself was a Jew. He was born a Jew, according to the genealogy given him in the Gospel of John. He belonged to the house of David, so he came from a princely line. So he lived a Jew, he was raised a Jew, and he died a Jew. Remember that placard on his cross, Jesus Nazarene Rex Yud, Jesus the Nazarene, the King of the Jews. It was mocking Jesus, but it does suggest that he did not preach Christianity. He preached a form of Judaism. At the time of Jesus, Judaism was different from the Judaism, somewhat different from what we call today Rabbinic Judaism. At the time, it was sectarian Judaism, and Jesus was one of the leaders of those sects of Judaism. So to put things in very simple terms, Christianity is Judaism. The only difference, there are a number of different, that's why Christians call the Gospels the New Testament, but they have not relinquished the Torah, and they call the Jewish Bible, which the Jews do not call the Jewish Bible, they call it the Old Testament. The Jews don't call it the Old Testament either. So the difference, or one of the main differences, if you will, is that the Jews are still the Jews are Jews who are still waiting for the Messiah, the Mashiach. Christians are Jews who believe that the Messiah already came and he's coming back again. Okay, so this is to put things in very, very simple terms. Otherwise, the similarities are very striking. The foundational prayer in Christian literature, the foundational prayer, the creed, if you will, Our Father who are in heaven, comes from Jewish tradition. So when Jesus taught his disciples to this prayer, which became the creed of Christianity in Aramaic, is actually something that he knew from his own Jewish tradition. He was not inventing a new prayer. It is still extant in today's Judaism. It's a very similar prayer in Aramaic. So Jesus was a Jew. He came from a Davidic line. If he were a Jew living today, his last name would be Katz. Because he was a Kohen. He came from a priestly family, so that's the Ka part, and he was a tzaddik, a Siddiq in Arabic, a holy man or a righteous man. So Kohen tzaddik becomes Katz. So this is to tell you how Jewish Jesus is. And again, remember that in the time of Jesus, the Judaism was not the Judaism of today. It was sectarian Judaism, and there are four main sects with which Jesus mentions in the Gospels. That's transmitted to us in the Gospels. The Pharisees are some of the people that Jesus the Jew clashed with, from the Perushim in Hebrew, which means those who separate themselves from the rest, those who purify themselves. There were the Sadducees, Tzaddukim, the righteous ones in Hebrew. There were the Essenes, which is a messianic group of ascetics who lived a life very similar to the life that Jesus lived. If you believe the Gospels, life of contemplation, life of prayer, fasting. They believed in purification by water, baptism. They believed in healing. Those are the Essenes. So this is the messianic group that scholars believe Jesus belonged to. It's certainly the group of John the Baptist, which was a group to which Jesus himself belonged. And the fourth group is what the Hellenized name of it is the Zealots, the Kanaim in Hebrew, the followers of those who admire or those who follow, the real followers, the Zealots. And the Zealots were actually a militant group among those sects of Judaism, and they were among those, like the Essenes, who were fighting Roman domination. So to put in the Zealots in modern terminologies, the Zealots of the time of Jesus would have been the ones who today would use suicide bombing and such like. So it is clear from what I've described earlier, the life of contemplation and prayer and fasting and purification by water, baptism and healing and miracle working. It's clear that the sect of the Essenes comprised the social and spiritual environment in which Jesus himself lived. And based on what we know about this sect from finds you've probably heard about as the Dead Sea Scrolls, this sect, the Essenes, in today's parlance, could also actually be referred to as fundamentalist Jewish sect. So it is believed that Jesus, who was baptized by John, was associated with the sect, but Jesus also had contact with the wider and less sectarian Jewish circles, particularly the Pharisees. Jesus came from the Galilee region, where he lived most of his life, and most of his ministry was among Galilean Jews, an area that corresponds roughly today with northern modern Israel and southern modern Lebanon. One could therefore say that two streams converge in Jesus of Nazareth. In some respects, Jesus was influenced by the Essenes, who were mainly spread out around the area of Galilee. And this is manifested, for example, by his deep sensitivity to social injustice, his message preaching righteousness and healing and so forth. And two, in other respects, particularly in the fundaments of Jesus' theology, Jesus was influenced by the mainstream and more popular position of the Pharisees. So, to conclude, at least this segment, I've decided to make them into shorter segments. Jesus was born and raised a Jew, and he died as a Jew. It was Paul of Tarsus, rather than Jesus, who determined or who formed the true nucleus, if you will, and the principles of what we call today Christianity, the theology of the cross. Paul of Tarsus himself was not one of the followers of Jesus initially. He did not know Jesus personally, and indeed Paul fought the followers of Jesus. The Judeo-Christians, incidentally, the term, Judeo-Christian civilization or Judeo-Christian tradition, or the Jewish followers of Jesus were called Judeo-Christians, right? So the Jewish followers of the Messiah, the Jewish followers of Christos, Christ, the Mashiach. But Paul later recognized in Jesus the Jewish Messiah, the Messiah that the Jewish people awaited, the people of Israel were awaiting, and he transformed the meaning of the Messianic idea to make it into a Christian idea. The Pauline idea of the Son of God who died on the cross to save mankind from the consequences of original sin, etc., was a totally different concept from Jesus, the Son of David, which John spoke about, who was to redeem the nation of Israel. Remember that when Jesus came to, I think, Tyre or Sidon, and there was this Canaanite woman tugging at his robe, telling him, "Master, Rabbi, teacher, Rabbi, save my daughter, she's ill." What does he tell her? Those of you who are familiar with this story. He tells her, "Leave me alone, woman," or something to that effect. I have come here for the children of Israel, not for the dogs. I mean, look at this type of language he uses to describe those unclean, non-monotheistic Canaanites. I have come here for the children of Israel, not for the dogs. And what does she tell him? "But Master, Rabbi, the dogs eat from the crumbs that fall off the table," or something to that effect. And this is when he tells her that, "Go home, your faith has saved you," or something to that effect. So the Pauline Jesus who dies on the cross to save mankind is quite different from the Jesus, the Messiah of John, who comes as the Mashiach to redeem the nation of Israel. So Paul too was, by the way, was a Jew, and as a young man, as I mentioned before, Paul was persecuting these followers of Jesus. He had studied in Jerusalem, and the revolutionary interpretation which he gave to Judaism, allowing the inclusion of non-Jews, because initially the followers of Jesus not only were Jews, but had to be Jews. They could not have been anything else. They had to recognize Jewish law, which was very onerous and remains onerous for those who wanted to follow, observing the Sabbath, dietary laws, very rigorous demands. So Paul would change all that. In any case, I'm going to stop here for this episode. I wanted it to be shorter, 5 minutes. It turned out to be 23 minutes. So I'll continue. This is essentially ended up being another introduction to Zionism rather than speaking on Zionism per se. And in subsequent episodes, I will develop these ideas. Thanks for sticking around. Ciao.